in the studio for more now is Dr. Emmanuel Navon, research fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and an international relations expert. And Emmanuel, I think a lot of some surprise that may come from many viewers hearing that item is that 26 years after Israel signed a peace treaty with Jordan, it still did not have an agreement on overflights. I mean, cold peace. It barely sounded like it was peace at all.
That's right. And we have to understand that historically, I mean, Jordan and Israel were formerly at war, but the real struggle of Jordan was with the PLO historically, much more than with Israel. After Israel signed a peace agreement with the PLO in 1993, it basically asked Jordan to follow suit, but the Jordanians felt that already they had this relation with Israel, which they didn't really want to officialize. And the Jordanian monarchy, even though, you know, basically survived after the 1970 Black September, thanks to the U.S. and to Israel, the Jordanian monarchy, after signing this peace agreement with Israel in 1994, tried to really downplay the relation with Israel, because don't forget that 2/3 of the population in Jordan is Palestinian. And they didn't want to seem to be more royalist than the king, I would say. What changed recently that made Jordan join this movement in the Middle East and sign this open sky agreement with Israel? Well, first of all, they feel like they have this legitimacy that even if the UAE and Bahrain are signing an agreement with Israel, why shouldn't they join?
Right, and let me add this, even though there's no peace agreement, even the Saudis opening their airspace.
Absolutely. So they feel like they have the backing. They're not alone anymore. You know, if the Palestinians criticize them, they can say, look, the whole Arab world is doing it. Why shouldn't we when we have a peace agreement with Israel? We've had it for 26 years. In addition, there's another element. Don't forget that recently Jordan joined together with Egypt and other countries in the region this forum for natural gas together with Israel and European countries. Jordan today is benefiting from Israel's natural gas resources in partnership with Cyprus, and therefore this economic relation between Israel and Jordan for energy is also strengthening those ties and making the two economies more interdependent. So that also explains this decision of Jordan to kind of officialize those relations with Israel.
Right, I'm glad you brought up Egypt, because we just had in the studio just this week Amira Golan, who is now going to Egypt as the Israeli ambassador there. There have been complications both with Egypt, and we have to admit also in Israel, about her appointment. And I asked her about the Egyptian side, also saying that she feels that these agreements, the Abraham Accords, is going to help out, make her job easier in Egypt, along with other factors, including, as you said, the natural gas and the alliance that makes in the Eastern Mediterranean, perhaps against other, perhaps less friendly countries.
Especially vis-a-vis Turkey, because I think today Al-Sisi really realizes that Turkey, I mean, Erdogan, the Egyptian president, is having this kind of neo-colonial Ottoman policy throughout not only North Africa, but also the Middle East, in Syria, and also in the Caucasus, and there's conflict now between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And I think that the Egyptian president today is very wary of this policy, this aggressive policy of Erdogan. Don't forget that Erdogan also is a big supporter of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. That also bothers the Egyptian president. And Al-Sisi feels that he has the back also of the United States, of the current administration in the U.S., and this also legitimizes for him this open policy vis-a-vis Israel. Now, we have to understand that in the case of Egypt, we depend very much on Al-Sisi being in power, because you remember what happened when the Muslim Brotherhood came to power in 2012.
Mohammed Morsi,
exactly. So the relation, this very positive relation we have now with Egypt is welcome, of course, but it's very Morsi dependent. And here, as I said, the role of the Turkish president Erdogan, his very aggressive policies vis-a-vis Israel, vis-a-vis Egypt, and in the Mediterranean in general, is also helping to kind of strengthen and officialize this relation between Egypt and Israel.
Briefly, Emmanuel, do you think, though, on a person-to-person level, when Egyptians and Jordanians see the relations Israel have with Emiratis, that may impact just also more on the ground level?
I think it might impact, if you look, for example, on the social media. I mean, the media in Egypt and Jordan remain very, officially quite hostile to Israel. It is not the case in the UAE. And I think what was missing for all these years, during all these years, despite these official agreements between Israel, Egypt, and Jordan, was a people-to-people peace. That was very much missing, both in terms of tourism, in terms of the public discourse. And that might begin to change. Hopefully, maybe that will be one of the positive impact of the social media, maybe there will be also people-to-people peace, which hasn't been happening so far, unfortunately.
Right, it hasn't been. And as you said, maybe Arab media played a role. And now seeing how the Gulf media, which is very influential, not just there, but throughout the Arab world, in Egypt and Jordan, this more positive side of Israel might start to impact, as you say, on people-to-people relations. Emmanuel Navon, thank you for joining us again.